It's a Tuesday morning like any other. You wake your 10-year-old son at 7:30, prepare his breakfast, kiss his forehead and say, "I love you, have a great day at school." He takes his backpack, smiles with that smile you've known since he was born, and walks out the door. 10 minutes later, he's gone forever. But imagine discovering, years later, that the man suspected of taking your son kept a collection of 22,000 photographs of children and mysterious codes that, once deciphered, revealed words that made an experienced investigator scream, "My God, he ate him!" This is the true story of Rachel Howard and her son Zachary. A case that transformed a small American town into the scene of the most disturbing crime you've ever heard. If you're not yet subscribed to the channel, leave a like and hit the bell, because what you're about to discover goes beyond any nightmare. Great Falls, Montana, 1995. Nestled among the majestic Rocky Mountains, this agricultural town of about 60,000 inhabitants represented everything good about small-town America. It was the kind of place where people left their houses unlocked, where neighbors knew each other by name, where children played freely in the streets without parents worrying. Predators live elsewhere, the inhabitants thought. They don't live in Great Falls, Montana. It was in this atmosphere of safety and tranquility that Rachel Howard arrived with her 3 children. Recently divorced, she was trying to restart her life, working during the day and studying interior design in the evening. As a single mother, Rachel struggled to survive financially while building a better future for her family. Her eldest son, Zachary Ramsey, quickly adapted to the new life. Zach was exactly the type of child any community would embrace. At 10 years old, he had a contagious smile that lit up any room. He was friendly, polite, loved by everyone at Whittier Elementary School. The neighbors knew him well. He lived in a house that faced an alley, and every day he walked along this same quiet route to and from school. It was a walk of just a few minutes that he had been making for months without any problems. February 6, 1996 began like any other day in the Howard family's life. Zach woke up at the usual time, had breakfast, received his mother's kiss and "I love you," took his school backpack, and left for another normal day of classes. He followed the alley as he always did, greeting some neighbors along the way. But somewhere between his house and the school, over a distance that took only 10 minutes to walk, Zachary Ramsey simply vanished from the face of the earth. When Zach didn't show up at school that morning, initially no one was too worried. It was common for some students to occasionally be late. But when the school contacted other students and discovered that only Zach was absent, the alarm sounded. They called Rachel, who immediately became desperate. Her son would never skip school without warning, especially on an ordinary Tuesday morning. A massive search was organized within hours. Community volunteers, police officers, firefighters, rescue teams. Everyone mobilized to find the missing child. They searched every corner of Great Falls, every abandoned building, every wooded area in the vicinity. But there was no trace of Zachary anywhere. It was as if he had simply evaporated into thin air. For the authorities, it quickly became clear that this wasn't a runaway situation or an accident. Someone had taken Zach, and in a place where everyone knew each other, where violent crimes were practically non-existent, suspicion quickly fell on the only individual in town with a criminal history related to children. Nathaniel Benjamin Levi. Barjona was a 39-year-old man who occasionally worked in an apartment building located exactly on the route Zach took every day. But Barjona wasn't his real name. He had been born as David Brown in Massachusetts, and his story was a catalog of horrors that no community should ever have to face. David Brown began showing violent behaviors from childhood. At 17, in 1977, he executed a meticulously planned scheme that shocked even experienced investigators. Disguising himself as a police officer with a fake badge, a toy gun, and real handcuffs, he waited outside a local movie theater. When 2 children left the building, Brown approached them, claiming to be an undercover officer and convincing them to accompany him. He took the boys to an isolated location where he brutally attacked them. The young aggressor thought he had killed one of the victims, leaving her unconscious on the roadside. Fortunately, both children survived, and David Brown was arrested and convicted of attempted murder. After 2 years in prison, he was transferred to a psychiatric treatment center. Virtually all psychological evaluations conducted during his confinement reached the same terrifying conclusion. David Brown was a sexually dangerous person who should never be released. The specialists were unanimous in their recommendation. This man represented a constant danger to society, especially to children. But in 1984, Brown claimed to have found religion during his confinement. He said he had become a soldier of God, and to mark this supposed spiritual transformation, changed his name to Nathaniel Benjamin Levi Barjona, adopting a biblical identity that, according to him, represented his new life. In 1990, Barjona's family hired 2 Christian psychologists who, surprisingly, attested that he had been saved and was unlikely to commit crimes again. Based on these questionable evaluations, Massachusetts authorities released Barjona. It was a decision that would have disastrous consequences. Only 6 weeks after his release, Barjona was arrested again for assaulting a 7-year-old child. This time, he faced life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. But his mother pleaded with the court, promising to personally supervise her son if he was released on parole. She guaranteed that both would move to Great Falls, Montana, where they would live with Barjona's brother, away from the temptations and problems of the past. The state of Massachusetts, apparently eager to get rid of the problem, accepted the agreement. It was a decision that local Great Falls officials later described as an absolute scandal. When Barjona arrived in town in 1991 and registered at the parole office, the employees were furious, but there wasn't much they could do. He was legally under their jurisdiction and technically free. When Zachary Ramsey disappeared, in February 1996, Barjona naturally became the main suspect. Witnesses placed him in the alley where Zach used to walk that morning. His vehicle was also spotted in the area at the time of the disappearance. But despite the circumstantial evidence, police couldn't definitively connect him to the case. There was no body, no physical evidence of a crime, no concrete proof that something terrible had happened to Zach. Rachel Howard categorically refused to accept that her son was dead. For months, she made moving public appeals for Zach's safe return. "Whoever has my son," she said with tears in her eyes. "He's a good boy. Please be kind to him, treat him well and bring him back." But her appeals remained unanswered. While Rachel kept hope alive, the rest of the community slowly began to accept the worst. The school planted a memorial garden with flowers that don't wither, placing a plaque that read, "Lost, but not forgotten." They wanted to be careful not to make the mistake of suggesting that Zach would never return. But reality was becoming inevitable. The case went cold for 3 long years. Rachel continued searching for her son, but police were no closer to solving the mystery of his disappearance. Then, on December 13th, 1999, something happened that would change everything. A detective was going to work when he passed in front of Lincoln Elementary School and saw something that immediately activated all his internal alarms. Nathaniel Barjona was standing in front of the school, dressed as a police officer. The detective immediately recognized Barjona and knew something was terribly wrong. When police arrested Barjona, they discovered he was carrying a real kidnapping kit: fake badge, stun gun, pepper spray, and a complete police uniform. His apartment was only 3 blocks from the school. It was a heart-stopping discovery. A possible child kidnapping had been prevented by pure luck. With Barjona in custody for impersonating a police officer, investigators were finally able to obtain a warrant to search his apartment. What they found inside was beyond their worst nightmares. Barjona's apartment was a bewildering and dark world. It was literally crammed from floor to ceiling with thousands of bizarre objects. There were Christmas decorations scattered across all surfaces and walls, thousands and thousands of pieces of handwritten paper, and most impressive of all, approximately 22,000 photographs of children. Some of these photographs were cut from magazines, others were real photos, and many had been obtained from Great Falls school yearbooks. It was an obsessive and terrifying collection that suggested a level of fixation on local children that was simply incomprehensible. Police confiscated 55 boxes of evidence from Barjona's apartment, a process that took 3 months to be completely cataloged and analyzed. During this meticulous investigation, detectives faced the nauseating possibility that Barjona had abused countless local children over the years. In early 2000, they found the first concrete piece of evidence connecting Barjona to Zachary Ramsey's disappearance, a handwritten list containing not only the names of known victims from Massachusetts, but also Zach Ramsey's name and several other children who lived in Great Falls. The investigators knew that the identities of these other local children were hidden somewhere in the boxes of evidence still unexamined. About 9 months after, the investigation began. While searching through the confiscated material, a detective found a roll of photographic film. When he had it developed, he discovered images that led him directly to the identification of 3 local victims. The photographs showed Barjona in compromising poses, but more importantly, they also contained images of 3 boys aged 5, 9, and 13. The detective recognized them immediately. They were children who lived in the same building as Barjona, directly above his apartment. These 3 boys came from troubled families and didn't have much support in their lives. Barjona had taken advantage of this vulnerability, befriending them over several months. He would take them to dinner, to movies, and they spent almost every day at his apartment. All 3 had serious developmental problems, which made it easier for Barjona to manipulate them. The predator had managed to convince the boys that he was an undercover federal marshal. He wore t-shirts and caps with U.S. Marshal inscriptions, and periodically allowed one of the boys to wear his hat, making them feel special and important. For these children in need of a father figure, Nathan seemed like the father they never had. But throughout this time, Barjona was continuously abusing them. The children were so ashamed and confused about what was happening that it took about 2 hours of careful interviewing before the oldest boy finally managed to break the silence in what the investigator described as the most horrible breakdown I've ever witnessed. What the boy revealed was even more disturbing than the investigators had imagined. He explained that Barjona had installed a pulley in the ceiling of his apartment, from which he suspended the children while abusing them. The discovery of this pulley and the accompanying rope was a grim confirmation of the terrifying story they were hearing. This information represented the biggest discovery of the entire case. Barjona had been arrested only for impersonating a police officer, a relatively minor charge that would probably result in just 1 year in prison. But now, they had 3 identified victims presenting charges that could sentence him to life imprisonment. And more importantly, these children were also on the list where Zach Ramsey's name appeared, connecting all the dots of the investigation. On July 5, 2000, Barjona was formally charged with assault against the 3 local boys. But Detective John Cameron continued to be obsessed with discovering the truth about Zachary Ramsey. What he discovered in the following weeks was almost beyond human comprehension. Hidden among the evidence, Cameron found a complete series of coded writings that Barjona had made. They looked like just random letters organized in small blocks. No one could really understand what they meant, but Cameron was determined to decipher them, believing they contained the answers about what had happened to Zach Ramsey. It took approximately 6 months of intensive work to break the code. When John Cameron finally managed to decipher the writings, he saw something begin to emerge from those apparently meaningless letters. The words that appeared were so disturbing that he literally screamed, "My God, he ate him!" And it was at that moment that they first realized it was very likely that Barjona had not only killed, but also cannibalized Zachary Ramsey. When news of Cameron's discovery began to circulate, those who knew Zach were completely devastated. The situation had gone from something bad happened to something horrible and evil happened. It was a level of evil that no one had ever thought could happen in their community. But now there was evidence suggesting that exactly that had occurred. More determined than ever to find physical evidence, Cameron began carefully investigating the movements of Barjona and his family during 1996. He discovered that both Barjona's mother and brother were out of town attending a funeral on February 6th, exactly the day of Zach's disappearance. Nathan Barjona was completely alone at home, with time and privacy to do whatever he wanted. Cameron also discovered that Barjona had exclusive access to a garage behind the family house. He obtained a warrant to search it, and a forensic team spent approximately 3 weeks at the site. They even brought a small excavator and sifted through every piece of dirt, digging meticulously. During the excavations, they found bones. In Aldi's total, they discovered approximately 26 bone fragments wrapped in letterhead paper that had Nathan Barjona printed on it. They thought for sure they had found the answer they were looking for. They found small pieces of bone that appeared to have been cut, exactly where they thought Nathan had dismembered Zach. An examination confirmed the bones were human, from an adolescent approximately Zach's age. They gathered all the material and sent it to the laboratory for DNA analysis. Then came the result no one expected. The DNA wasn't Zach's. To this day, no one knows whose bones those were. It was a devastating blow for Cameron. But for Zach's mother, Rachel, it confirmed what she had always believed, that Zach was still alive and would one day come home. Her unwavering faith that her son was somewhere out there waiting to return remained intact. Since there was still no conclusive evidence that Zach had been murdered, prosecutor Brand Light put the case on hold. Instead, he decided to focus on the charges he had already filed against Barjona related to the 3 local boys. "I wanted to try the assault case first," Light explained later. "I thought it was really important to get that conviction because, obviously, the murder case was a case without a body. Very, very difficult. I have to say at that point I really didn't care if we took him to trial for the murder. I would have loved to do it, but getting him imprisoned for life was really the goal." Due to the high emotions surrounding the Zach Ramsey case in Great Falls, Barjona's trial was moved to a town 150 miles away. The trial began on February 20th, 2002. The prosecutor knew that 90% of the case depended on how the 3 boys would testify. When the 5-year-old child took the stand, the team had worked intensively with him to simply tell the truth. But when the time came, the boy waved to everyone in the courtroom, talked to the judge and laughed, doing exactly what you'd expect a 5-year-old to do in such an intimidating situation. His testimony provided no useful information. The 9-year-old boy completely refused to admit he had been abused, leaving all the weight of the case on the 13-year-old adolescent. The moment he testified became the turning point of the entire trial. "I'll never forget our 13-year-old boy taking the stand to tell his story," the prosecutor recalled. "We got to the point where he really had to talk about Mr. Barjona, touching his private parts. He stopped talking, and it seemed like forever to me. But it was probably only 30 seconds. I got closer to him and said, 'It's okay. Everything's going to be okay. Where did he touch you?' His eyes filled with tears, and he finally turned to me and said the word. I looked at the jury, and I was choking up. And I saw that some of the jurors were choking up too. It was a turning point in the trial." On February 25th, the jury retired to consider its verdict. In the case of the 5-year-old child, Barjona was found not guilty due to lack of evidence. In the case of the 9-year-old boy, the jury couldn't reach a consensus. But in the case of the 13-year-old adolescent, Barjona was found guilty of assault. "Waiting for the jury to return was horrible," said the prosecutor. "When they came back, being in that courtroom was incredible. Everyone broke down crying and high-fiving. Barjona was sentenced to 130 years in prison, ineligible for parole, effectively a life sentence. Barjona's fate was finally sealed, but Zach Ramsey's mystery remained unresolved. Light and Cameron were haunted by the thought that Barjona might escape punishment for the murder. When I would sit with the investigators, Light recalled, I saw nails bitten down to the cuticles, shaking, people totally consumed by the search for closure. In the summer of 2002, Light prepared to take Barjona to trial for Zach's homicide. It would be the toughest case of his life. Jurors watch TV and expect you to come in with all this scientific evidence. When you don't have a body, you don't have a cause of death. I thought it was a very strong circumstantial case. We were going to give it 100%, and there was a good possibility we could win. My own purpose was to take him to trial and eventually get him to cooperate to recover the body. That really was our only goal. Just get us the body. Initially, Rachel Howard didn't support the idea of the homicide trial. She wanted to keep the search for her son alive. There's been enough negativism, she said. Let's stop this now and move forward with love. If we do that, things will be okay. Cameron and Light believed Zach was dead, but before convincing a jury, they had to convince Rachel. They presented the entire case to her and asked if she would testify that Zach was no longer alive. Setting aside her deepest hopes, she agreed. I remember running into Rachel on a weekend, Cameron said later. She gave me a big hug and thanked me for working so hard. I said, that's okay. We've been interviewing you and getting you ready for trial. But in truth, the bulk of the case was no more than a theory about how and why Barjona had done something unspeakable to a 10-year-old boy. The theory was this. He had the house and garage to himself, so he set into motion a plan to kidnap Zach, torture him, dismember him, and then feed people he despised at his church with the flesh. He had photographed those dinners. Several psychological evaluations had acknowledged that he had a very strong desire and curiosity about the taste of human flesh. On Thursday, September 27th, with the trial just 1 week away, prosecutors and police were making final preparations in an evening meeting when they learned incredible news. "We were all in the office gearing up for this big trial," recalled one of the prosecutors, and all of a sudden one of the county attorneys walks in and says, "Hey, I just saw Rachel with the 2 defense attorneys at dinner. We actually had a meeting scheduled with her the next day. She came in and we asked her what was going on. When was the last time she had seen the defense counsel? She didn't tell us the truth, so we brought it out that, hey, we saw you last night meeting with defense counsel. What's going on?" Well, she just blew up at us. It was then that they learned that the defense attorneys had taken Rachel out to dinner, groomed her testimony, and she was the first witness to take the stand. Her testimony was going to be that her son was still alive, and at that point, you have reasonable doubt right there, so you have no case. "We were just shocked by it," said Light. "We'd worked so hard and this just came out of the blue." Rachel claimed she never wanted to testify, but police threatened to arrest her if she didn't. Cameron and Light vehemently denied ever making such a threat. "It was very upsetting," Cameron remembered. "I remember giving an interview to KRTV and I wished I hadn't because I said things on there that I was furious about and it was all pointed at her." Light made a pragmatic decision. "I already had life without parole. I wasn't about to cost the taxpayers another $500,000 when I had a mother of the victim who didn't want to cooperate." Barjona was never prosecuted for the murder of Zachary Ramsey. "We always tried to continue to get him to give up the body, but he never would give us something so we could get some closure. But he's the type of guy that would just love to hold that power over the cops especially, and go to his grave like that." And he did. On April 13th, 2008, Barjona was found dead in his cell from a heart attack. Zachary Ramsey has never been found. It will never be known for certain what happened on February 6, 1996. The entire saga still deeply affects Great Falls to this day. "We always felt that this was a safe community," reflected a resident. "You took care of your kids and you were careful with them. But yet, predators live other places. They don't live in Great Falls, Montana, but they do." Rachel's denial and her own grief about her son vanishing without a trace has been absolutely devastating for her. The idea that her son was kidnapped, mutilated, cut into pieces and then fed to other people by the perpetrator is simply incomprehensible. She devoutly believes that Zach is alive. "If my child was missing and the police were never able to say what happened to him, then I would hope that someday he's going to walk through the door. It would make you live better," she said. And maybe she's right. Maybe somewhere Zachary Ramsey is still alive, waiting to come home. Or maybe the codes deciphered by Detective Cameron revealed a truth so horrible that it's better never to know for certain. What we know is that Great Falls, Montana, will never again be the same quiet town where people left their doors unlocked. The Zachary Ramsey case reminds us that evil can exist anywhere, even in the places we consider safest. It shows us how the search for justice can consume entire lives, how truth can be as complex as it is elusive, and how some questions may remain unanswered forever. If you made it this far, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and activate notifications, so you don't miss our next cases. Leave in the comments what real case you'd like to see here on the channel, and tell me what you thought of this story that forever marked the Great Falls community. Until next time.